Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of the Everything is Okay podcast. I'm Brad Stair.
I'm David Meggs.
James Eisenhower.
So in the last episode, you heard a lot from me. You heard a lot of my story. You heard a lot of my time in college when I moved to California and some when I came back. And we also heard from David from when he moved to Hattiesburg. So we thought this is kind of a part two of why we are who we are. And we thought that we would kind of start with David and let him continue on with his story and then move on to James and hear his story as well.
So I think at the foundation of us unpacking our story, and really at the root of everything is okay, you know, we're trying to ask the question, how are we still actively or at least attempting to follow Christ? And especially with our shared experiences, the things that we've learned, some of the disconnect that we've experienced in church, and I think that y'all have experienced in church, if you went through that, how can we still believe in a God that we can't see when so many terrible things are happening all around us?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that factors into my journey. So when I finished up at Southern Miss, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I enjoyed interacting with college students. I also had a little bit of a heart for service and for adventure. And what's interesting about missions or even just service work is that they kind of factor those two into it, right? Like you're interacting with folks that have never been a part of your life, that odds are have a lot less money than you are, depending on if you're going out of country or even different parts of our country.
Right, absolutely.
You know, if we're honest, the parts that we never drive through. And so I applied to Peace Corps, and I applied to University of Texas, and I applied to another school. I wanted to study student affairs administration because I pictured myself making an impact in students' lives because without question, the people at Southern Miss that were in not only faculty positions, but also as student affairs administrators, took time and energy to focus on me, had patience with me and everything that comes with that, and helped me navigate some difficult experiences in my life, not only from like a growth standpoint, but a lot of identity issues that I struggled with, specifically with accepting the fact that I was a white guy, which did not come natural to me at all, or accepting the fact that I was privileged, like financially, which is another thing that I absolutely did not want to accept. Brad's laughing. Why are you laughing?
Do you remember when you came out to visit me in California and you brought me a book? Do you remember what that book was?
I do. No, not in California. Tell me what book was that?
It was White Like Me.
Yes. Yeah, I thought I gave you that in Austin.
You might. Okay, so you gave it to me. You may have given it to me at any particular point, but I remember you gave me that book specifically because I think I still have it somewhere. I think it's at my parents' house.
Yeah, and it's funny, that book came into my life not while I was at Southern Miss, but actually when I was in grad school. To the top. We're going to have such a solid season this year. I'm calling it right now.
Yeah, we'll see.
Southern Miss football is going to be a lot of fun to watch. To my Southern Miss fans out there, it's always fun, but sometimes so heartbreaking.
But you get a lot of people from us. You get a lot of our coaches. You get a lot of our players.
We basically have a pipeline from Oklahoma State to Southern Miss.
We do. It's like they followed you. They knew where you went.
At the same time, didn't Auburn take one of your coaches?
Yeah, but that guy sucked. Well, we took somebody from Auburn. That was
really?
Johnson.
I thought we got somebody from y'all as well.
You probably did.
Maybe we just traded.
Yeah, it's funny. Hattiesburg, we like to pretend like we're the hub city. Like that's one of our slogans is like hub city. And that's because people stop and fill up their car here on their way to somewhere else.
Right.
And Southern Miss, unfortunately, at times feels like one of those pit stops for up-and-coming coaches, especially like offensive coordinators.
You've gotten two of ours.
We've gotten two of Oklahoma State's that come there, become head coaches, dominate, and kick butt with our programs, and then get picked up by North Carolina or some other school. Or Auburn. Yeah. War Eagle. So I was at a crossroads. I was like, Peace Corps. I wanted to go out, experience a different country. I wanted to be forced to learn another language. because I never did, even though I feel like I took 4 or 5 classes of Southern Miss in French, and I can't say Jack in French, which probably speaks more on my
At the same
inability.
time, you do have a pretty elaborate German accent that comes out when you're upset with your dogs.
That's true. That's true.
So
I do channel at least this, like the sounds. I don't think I'm saying anything.
No, I think it might be racist.
It's
not
probably
totally sure.
extremely racist, actually. So Peace Corps didn't work out, basically because I visited Austin, Texas for the first time, and I was there during a weekend that South by Southwest Music Festival was occurring, which was absolutely on purpose by the recruiters for this graduate program.
Absolutely.
Because, oh my gosh, I just drank the Kool-Aid. I called the Peace Corps recruiter because they still hadn't told me. They hadn't narrowed it down to what country it was going to be, but I'd made it so far through the process. And I was like, yeah, this is going to work out. I'm going to grad school. They were not stoked about that. So we'd been through the process for like over a year. But I was like, y'all should have told me what country I was going to go to. That was my critique to them. I was like, listen, I'm moving. I'm like snapping left and right. Which way am I going? Where am I going?
Yeah, I'm a commodity. You
I'm a commodity,
should have picked up on that.
Lock me down. Lock me down. So I ended up going to University of Texas. And what was interesting about that experience for me was that at University of Southern Mississippi, I stepped back from my faith a little bit and primarily reflecting on my Southern Baptist upbringing in Oklahoma. I had a couple different interactions with people where I would challenge them on something, whether or not they were cursing or whether or not they were drinking or whether or not they were sexing all up in that space. So I had a lot of these different interactions. And one of the interactions that happened at Southern Miss that I think is important to my story was that I started at the Baptist Student Union. And I joined a fraternity my freshman year, and I was going to different parties, which I never did in high school. I never went to a party in high school because I was Baptist, and I thought it was wrong. And I thought I would be like basically encouraging people to be alcoholics and then die everywhere, because that's what we're taught. So anyway, I'd been to a couple of these parties, and I ran into, it was second semester of my freshman year, I ran into the director of the BSU in the middle of campus, and he pulls me aside and he goes, David. I was like, hey, how's it going? And he was like, I've heard you've been going to a lot of parties, and I just want you to know that you're a bad influence on the people that are around you, and you have a huge influence on people that you interact with, and the fact that you are buying into this fraternity culture and the fact that you are hanging out with people who are consuming way too much alcohol and doing all sorts of things that obviously we're against means that you are fighting against the kingdom of God. I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but I remember thinking, wow, I think you're wrong, man. Like I was furious. I was embarrassed because it was in the middle of campus and there's people walking past us, and I basically told the guy off. However, freshman David would have done that, and I never went back to BSU. And like that day was like I was done with the Baptist Student Union. Now I was getting paid to play bass at First Baptist Church in Hattiesburg. So you better believe I kept that up for like another 3 years. Because if you're gonna pay me to come there and do some stuff, all right, let's do it. But I was furious because in my mind, I'm getting this disconnect because I'm interacting with people who are quote-unquote Christians and non-Christians and realizing these people have value. They matter. They're interesting. They care about me. I'm showing that I care about them as well, developing these relationships with them. Late at night, maybe we have a couple beers in us and we're having these philosophical conversations that I never had these conversations when I was in church or when I was in a BSU event, etc. So it's interesting for me because you could tell, like, as we grow older, as we have these different experiences, we're collecting these experiences, and then at different times, whether or not we're aware of it or not, we're reflecting on those experiences and comparing them to these different laws or rules or beliefs that we have, and wondering if they line up, right? And for me, that specific example is one of many examples that occurred to me or that happened to me where like my armor was being chipped away, right? Like my belief system was being attacked, and I wasn't even aware of it at the moment.
One of the most difficult and heartbreaking things to me through the journey of faith is that it happened also for me and for a lot of people I interacted with in college. The idea that when you find out people who don't believe the same as you have value, somehow that separates you from your belief system.
Right.
And that is the most ridiculous thing when we claim to follow a Christ who is trying to establish
That
hurting
everyone
all
had
those
value.
people's value.
Yeah.
And yet that's absolutely something I've heard all the time as well.
It's interesting how we have this disconnect when we realize that, wait, Jesus loved the least of these, loved Samaritans, which take the word Samaritans and put any other world religion or atheist or agnostic, you name it, he loved them equally, like he loved the quote-unquote Jews at the time, which would be the Christians now, like the power structure. Who is the powerful religion? And that's such a difficult thing to navigate, or it was for me in college, because I had spent so much time almost feeling sorry or looking down on people who were pursuing the quote-unquote fun things of life and not sacrificing everything like I thought I was by being this legalistic Christian. And so that was an interesting process. And so that's where, for me, week after week in college, I just started kind of slowing down and trying to find a different type of faith community that was accepting people who, I don't know, consumed alcohol, which sounds silly now, but it absolutely wasn't silly at the time.
David, I have a story for you real quick that kind of goes with this. When I was in college, I don't know if you guys had one of these guys. I know this particular man made his way around like to Arkansas and Oklahoma and all these places, but we had a guy named Preacher Bob that would show up at our campus about once every couple of weeks, and he would stand on our library lawn, or he would stand next to the student union or somewhere, and he would literally call out fraternity and sorority people mostly, and he would point them and he would go, "You're going to hell because you sleep with your boyfriend, and you're going to hell because you drink alcohol, and you're going to hell because you do whatever."
Especially women, because they were dressing slutty. That was one of
Yeah, that was the big thing.
we had that guy. I don't know if it's the same fella, but yeah,
I don't know. We called him
was
Preacher
there.
Bob. I've heard, at Arkansas he was called Moses, but I hear he was the same guy. And the weirdest thing was two things. One, he always attracted a crowd, and a lot of people made fun of him, so that was one thing. But the other thing was that there was always a group of people who would gather around to try to make him look foolish.
Right.
And would yell all this stupid stuff back at him, thinking that they were yelling Christian things, and they ended up looking just as foolish.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting based on the conversation you had. Like, he was picking out fraternity and sorority mostly because they were wearing probably some shirt or something that said there's sorority on it, and just basically just flat out, you're going to hell because you're wearing those letters, essentially.
Right. Yeah, that guy is that's got to be a tough existence. They must have some sort of joy.
Yeah, but he's doing God's work, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Which is the crazy thing about it.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
I mean, we say it's insane, but realistically, were we far from that in our younger levels of faith?
I would say our mentality wasn't maybe necessarily far from that, but our approach wasn't that. We weren't
Right.
standing there telling people that they're going to hell.
The only difference between us and him was he cared more.
Yeah, that he
sucks.
like truly believed that those people were going to hell, and that I guess his rhetoric would do something to change that for him.
That's a good point.
But I had a lot of I had probably had that level of judgment in my heart for years and years and years.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. Like I got a lot of my value out of looking at other people and saying, well, I'm better than you.
Right. And that was something that was taught in this, when you believe in the list of these are your do's and don'ts. These are the criteria. Do you fit or not? When that's the case, your faith system is based on judging people. And so, of course, we end up in situations where that guy makes sense. I mean, I remember being told that basically life outside the walls of the church was a battle. And so you had to have your Bible with you at all times, because who goes into a battle without their weapon?
Right.
And
especially a giant book.
Right. Well, the sword of the Spirit and all those things.
Yeah.
How are you going to bash them on the forehead if you don't have it with you?
Right. It was just like so much aggression of an us versus them. And to save them, you have to turn them into an us. It makes sense to do what he was doing when that is your system of belief. Because, just like we were talking about, like with finding out these people who didn't have a faith like ours, had value, and that messed up our belief system. The problem with coming out on the other side too often is that we do the exact opposite of that, and we decide people within the church don't have value.
I was born an American saint. I flushed it down my American dream. I raised it up with the Christian flag. Burned it down when I got bad and you.
So going back, quite a few of my belief systems just unraveled. One of those was this whole True Love Waits campaign that I bought into as a child. That was one piece that, as I continued to talk to people that I respected or thought were smart or cared about, and found out that, oh my gosh, these other people who hit a certain age or a certain point, or where they felt like they fell in love, or they felt like they had found the person for them, had both decided that, well, we're going to go ahead and have sex. And that was a really challenging transition for me, because my faith structure was built a lot on shame of like, oh no, God's watching and he's just checking off these boxes, dude. And if you hit this box right here, like, you're going to burn for that much longer or whatever. So that was one piece of it. This whole thought of my specific faith structure or denomination being superior to other denominations, that started to unravel when I joined Campus Crusade for Christ in college and started interacting with people from, God forbid, that were Catholic, right? And started interacting with folks, talking to them about their belief system, learning that, oh my gosh, they have more books in the Bible than I did, which I also didn't know that at all. Nobody decided like, hey, David, you should know that there's additional books. And by the way, the process of selecting those books is really interesting. You should read a book about that. So this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Transition to University of Texas. When I got to University of Texas, I was at a point where I still had a belief in Jesus and a belief in God. I wasn't really sure when I started grad school on whether or not God was really taking time to kind of invest in me personally or care about which directions that I took. Because I started to realize that when I prayed, sometimes it felt like those prayers were answered. Sometimes it felt like they didn't. I started to realize even if I'm not praying, my light's still moving forward. Even if I decide not to pray about which school I'm going to go to, I can still select a school if they select me in the first place, and then watch out, I can go there. And nothing's stopping that from occurring. And so I was starting to have this understanding that, like, knowledge and certainty can be gathered absent of a relationship with God. Now, whether or not that's a false knowledge or false certainty is debatable. But I feel like this absence of faith, or the process of losing your faith, starts with a stronger foundation in your own ability to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And so for me, I continued to succeed in whatever I put my mind to. And sometimes I would opt in for God to be a part of that, and sometimes I didn't. Yet I was continuing to be successful. And so in grad school, I started spending a lot more time reading different philosophies, looking at different religions. I became really good friends with a couple Jewish students and started talking to them a little bit more. And the more I looked at the world in aggregate, or this larger picture of history, I saw these different groups of people that may or may not have had faith in the God of Abraham, that may or may not have prayed and cared about their families and their situation, who may have worked hard. And I saw again and again these atrocities occur to these people groups. And I was like, wait a second. All right, so you're telling me that every Muslim, every Hindu person, every Buddhist person, every Egyptian, like anybody, you name a people group that didn't believe in the God of Israel, like they're just burning in hell right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult working through all those processes, and I feel like the system that we were brought up in, when you start to see these people who, what we were taught is nothing is successful outside of God. Nothing ever. Yeah. And so as you do things,
which is not true.
Right. Well, I mean, as you pursue things, that falls apart. You see that people are evil and have no value if they don't profess the name of Jesus. And so then you meet people in college that don't believe that, but act out the life of Christ better than a lot of these people who profess Jesus. That breaks down your belief system. And so,
yeah,
with all these things that we were told, especially with interactions with different faiths and different things about the Old Testament, and how everything is about basically getting away with sin. Essentially, it's God's trying to judge us, and so we're having to go to Jesus to get rid of this sin. And so it's kind of a God is against us kind of feel,
like he's waiting for us to fall.
Absolutely. And so I don't think that system's good. And so going into college where you have these interactions, it makes total sense that your faith would start to fall apart.
And my faith did fall apart. I decided when I got to grad school, I tried to find another church community, and it didn't really stick. Just to piggyback on what you were saying, as I moved forward in life, I was surrounding myself with, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but I was surrounding myself with more and more quote unquote intelligent people, or like people who were like deeper thinkers, or took time to like tear things apart and then put them back together. And more I realized that these people were not the shiny Baptist Christians, or really Christians in general, that I was used to. And these people had great value and still have great value in my life. And so that was another piece. Like, it's just like crack after crack after crack to this whatever protective cocoon I had around me. So I get to Texas,
So what you're saying is your armor of God was cracking?
Yeah, my armor of God was paper thin. Like, it was built on disappointment, fear, and damnation.
Yeah, that breastplate of righteousness did not make it out of college for you.
No, it didn't. It did not. So I get to Texas, and I put God over in a corner, and I'm like, "What's up, man? I'm gonna do this, and I'll pray to you if I need anything."
Right.
So that was my faith at that point. I dominated in school in a way that I've never dominated. And it's funny because I am not Mr.
Humble?
Mr. A plus.
Oh.
That was a good one. I'm not very humble naturally. That's true too. But I was not the star student in high school or in college. Like, I did all right, but I was not the guy that was like, I get my value out of all the teachers looking at me and being like, you have really interesting things to say.
Right.
Thank you for critically thinking. But when I got to Texas, like, I was, and that was really interesting because I didn't know I had that part of me, but I invested heavily into like learning everything I could. And it was a really amazing experience. But in that, I continued to question more actively like my belief system. I was like, why are there so many good people who are doing what I think is Jesus's work that don't profess Jesus's name? And it's still like that whole concept of heaven and hell that I was spoon-fed just didn't make sense. Intellectually, it just doesn't. And like, I still struggle with that today. And honestly, I still don't know what I believe on the hell component for sure. But
it's very complicated.
It's very you're acting like you understand it. Like, do you think
I'm
that
not,
you
I'm not
understand
saying
it?
I understand it. I'm saying I have looked into it a whole lot, and it's one of those situations of, I feel like the more you understand, the more you realize you don't understand situation.
Yeah.
Is more of what I would say. So not saying that I understand it. I'm saying I understand enough at this point to know that there's a whole lot more than we can understand now. I understand how much of a framework of it is just guessing based on like random bits of information that we just kind of hodgepodge together. It's
Yeah. So my guess is that hell doesn't look like we think it does, if it does exist in the first place, which I'm still questioning whether or not it does. Personally, that's where I'm at. I absolutely think that going through that Texas experience was extremely important for me, because I realized that taking time to try to do things on my own, completely on my own, and not relying on this God to do it for me was so important for my stepping forward in my faith by absolutely falling on my face. Which I think is, unless we fall, unless we're broken, we're not going to, I don't think we're going to see even a glimpse of what God is or what he can do through us. Or we're going to be in the dark and live this super sheltered life where heaven looks like this, hell looks like this, and this is, you pray to God for stuff, and you go to church, and you see people that look like you, and then that's it. Which I know that I do not want that to be my existence.
so in that, then, was your time in Austin a time of you breaking then, would you say?
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily me breaking. It was me breaking other people by being 100% selfish.
Right.
And just doing what I wanted to do at the expense of other people in a way that I'd never done. Did a little bit in college, but not so much. Whether or not it was relationships, or whether like relationships in Austin or at Hattiesburg, or family or extended friends. It was just me in a way that I had never experienced, really. And in that, like, I grew intellectually because I was so self-absorbed and self-focused, but it sounds like an oxymoron, like it doesn't make sense, but like I spent tons of time reading, like hours and hours and hours and hours reading, drinking coffee, and then going to get drunk, then going to class, killing it in class, getting drunk, studying, getting drunk, playing music, and just reading. Like, and that's what I did for 2 years. And I experienced the world in a way that I'd never experienced it. As in, when we're behind this like evangelical glass window or whatever, and we're like, you can't touch this, or this. Like I touched it all except for hard drugs, basically.
Right.
And I was scared to death of hard drugs. That's why I didn't do it, because it wasn't pragmatic in my mind. I was like, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. Smoke some pot though. That's for sure. But like, I just dabbled in everything. Like I did it all. And I found aspects that were extremely fun about that. And I found aspects that were really, really shallow and hollow and kind of terrible. And so in that way, I didn't quote unquote fall on my face. I got really close to it, but I didn't. But I did experience a life without God. And even when I was on top, quote unquote, in my mind, I was still missing something, like a big question mark. And I don't know what it was at the time. I was just like, this is great and really, really fun. And I still feel like I'm helping people in some ways. I'm not really checking in with God that much, because frankly, I don't even know if he listens to me.
Yeah.
But it was empty, but I didn't realize it. And that's I think it was C.S. Lewis who was talking about God steps back from our lives, and at any moment and all moments, he's stepping in and like glimpsing us through our little like very simple timeline of existence, and loving us always, because he sees the complete picture, but not just our complete picture, but he sees like all of these splinter cells or the spider web of all of our individual interactions with other people, and how it like turns into this beautiful painting that only he can see.
Yeah.
And the reason that we can't do anything to earn God's love or lose God's love is because of that like his love and his adoration is almost like if you had a good father, of somebody who like watches your son step to a ledge and trip and fall like 2 feet and like mess up your knee, but allows you to do it so you'll learn a lesson and loves you through it and picks you up.
Right.
And like, I felt like God stepped back from my life, which he never did, but that's what it felt like, and let me jump off a cliff into a me-centric, selfish lifestyle,
Right.
which I absolutely opted into.
Nonsensical, words like a spiritual. You better know how much I love you. Beyond the physical, where words aren't political. You better know how much I love you. Oh.
When I moved to Charlotte, I never wanted to move to Charlotte. I wanted to live in Austin for the rest of my life and play music and be with people and like do some sort of day job and make that happen. But my first job out of grad school was actually at my national fraternity, and I was the director of leadership development, which means I wrote curriculum and ran programs and worked with college age students. And I was dating somebody at the time in Austin when I transitioned to Charlotte. And what's interesting about being healthy as an individual, making Brad laugh again because he's thinking of some memory.
I'm just remembering one of the times I visited Austin, and I think this was the girl you're talking about, and we went to Chicken Poop Bingo out in, yes, I censored that, but Chicken Poop Bingo out in the middle of nowhere in Austin, Texas. And that was one of the funnest experiences I can remember. But that's what was making me laugh.
Dude, that place was incredible.
I was remembering.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure that place
so
still
simple,
is incredible.
And you literally buy a square and they release a chicken and you wait for it to poop. And if it poops on your square, you win. And that was
so much
the
fun.
game.
It's basically as
so
redneck
simple, but so fun.
as you can get in entertainment, I think.
Yeah, in
it's pretty
Blue
awesome.
Dot, Austin, Texas. Which is wonderful. That is a great memory.
Yeah. So I mean, it only tied in because I think the girl you're talking about was there, but that's the only way. But that's immediately what came to my mind.
So like I was saying, I transitioned to Charlotte. I was dating somebody at the time, and I transitioned into a job that I was not prepared for, even in the least. And in my personality, my my mentality is learn whatever you need to in order to succeed at all costs and win. Like, do it, and don't bitch, don't moan. Like, do what it takes. And I've been told I had a very healthy ego as a child, like a lot of millennials, that like you can do this if you put your mind to it. Like, you're not going to be able to play pro sports, but you're smart enough to figure this out, and you have the work ethic to figure this out. So I transitioned to this job and realized my graduate program, which was phenomenal, that focused on college-age student development and sociology and a little bit of psychology and some business competencies. And I enjoyed that, and I learned about all that. But applying that in this new arena where I'm writing curriculum, which I had little to no experience doing, where I was putting on programs with a budget of, I don't know, $80,000. Like, just a lot of factors that I hadn't really experienced in my graduate assistantship or anything like that. So quite a few different unknowns. The relationship I was in faded very quickly, and so I'm in a new city. I know like 2 people. I'm in a job that I can't handle, and the one person that I had a relationship with that transitioned me into this area, or in this new town, is not there anymore. And I had never, to my knowledge, experienced quote unquote depression or clinical depression. I didn't really know what it was. Like, I thought that was something that like people who weren't good Christians experienced.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing I was taught.
Or people who are weak-minded.
Yeah, people who are weak-minded, who are running from God, etc., experience depression. Those are all lies. Unfortunately, I didn't know that. I also didn't know what the signs were for depression, or also symptoms, signs, or what could potentially lead to it. And apparently, if a lot of your foundational aspects of your life change in a very short amount of time, you are prone to be more susceptible to depression or anxiety, because all of us, regardless of whether or not we want to admit it, need some sort of control component in our life, like some sort of foundational component. And I think some Christians would argue that, like, oh, your relationship with God should be that foundation component, and I need you to just zone into that and experience that. And these sad thoughts and this lack of ability to control your surroundings, that's going to go away if you pray hard enough.
I do think there's aspects of being able to have your faith be that foundation. It just depends on where you're at in your faith and all
You
that.
think
It
that
can
your
be at
faith can
different
be
times.
foundational enough so you don't experience mental illness?
I'm not saying so you don't experience mental illness. I'm not saying as a way to avoid ever having it, but I'm saying as you were saying, when your foundation is removed, that makes you more susceptible to it. I'm saying it can be the foundation that's there. So I think it can be a foundation for people. I'm not saying anything can keep you out of mental health issues, because I don't think any level of any one thing, of having a foundation, having good relationships, having a good church community, having a good job, any of these things, none of them alone are enough to keep anybody, no matter how good any one of them is, none of it's good enough to be able to keep you out of mental health issues, because it's a health thing. I mean, you may need medication, you may need various things that...
Yeah, there's a genetic component to it as well.
Right, there's so many
we don't
things.
learn about at all in
Right,
the church,
so I'm not
obviously.
saying that it's something that makes it all go away if you pray enough. I'm saying it can
You
be
can't
a
pray the
beneficial
gay
thing.
away, and you definitely can't pray depression away.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and just throw that out there. So listeners, please don't run away. I promise it's going to be okay. But for real, though, like when you're talking about foundations or support groups or feeling protected or supported. And your faith I agree, can absolutely be an aspect of that. I didn't have much of anything. Which, talking again about this whole analogy of God watching you trip and fall and then picking you back up, that process was a really long process for me personally. It's not always long for everybody, and I'm sure there's people listening that are like, it wasn't very long for me. But I'm stubborn. I'm really stubborn. I went through a point where I was like, okay, all right, so I don't really know what's going on faith-wise. I think I'm a Christian, but I'm not really sure, and I don't know what I believe right now. I know that I hate failing. I know that, so I'm going to work my butt off in this job. So basically, I moved to a new situation. Instead of investing in myself or to like taking care of myself or trying to like build a community or trying to find some sort of faith community to tap into, I basically just worked a lot because I felt that I was like, if I work hard enough, I'm going to basically lie to myself and tell myself that I'm okay. Like I can do this kind of thing.
Right.
And so I was looking for my worth in my job and this handful of friends that I'd met and in just achievement, period. And it's funny, like when you look at specifically when you look at our generation right now, I think that we are potentially more susceptible to that need for achievement or that need for self-worth or self-recognition. And I'm not saying that other generations don't experience it. I'm sure they do. But I've seen and heard so many personal stories about people struggling with that. And like, I was one of them. So I hit Charlotte and I worked myself to a point where I think it was bad. So, I finally, at a couple different, like I joined a band and that was an amazing outlet for me. I was still working atrocious hours. I joined a church and I'd finally reached out to a doctor and I was like, listen, I think I'm experiencing depression. I don't really know what that is, but I need to get on some medication.
Yeah.
I had several days actually where I actually called in and lied and said I was sick because I didn't have enough energy to get out of bed. If you've ever experienced numbing, lethargic, lack of energy, lack of anything, willpower, newsflash, that's probably depression. Especially if it's lasting for weeks to months, which mine did.
Yeah.
Where it was hard to even socialize unless I was like tipsy.
Right.
Because I just didn't have the energy and was just like, what am I doing? And I just don't want to quit. Like I don't want to fail, but this sucks.
You know what I find interesting is that in the last episode, I talked about my experience with depression. And in this episode, you're talking about it. And it expressed itself in a couple different ways. I never had the feeling of I can't get out of bed. I can't be around people. I never had that. What I had was they're not going to like me. The people that I grew up with aren't wanting to talk to me now and things like that. So I find that interesting in that your form was you couldn't get out of bed. For me, it was I could get out of bed. I could go work. I could function, but I coped with things in a very negative way.
Right.
And I didn't
and I think
necessarily
that's,
recognize
like, I love that
it
you're
at
saying that
all.
because that's one of the biggest issues, I think, in this, at least in our society, is that we don't know how to recognize it, especially in men, right? Because if you think I was sitting around bawling my eyes out, you'd be disappointed.
Right.
Because that's not how it showed in me personally. Like some people it shows as like anger outbursts or like a lack of patience. For me personally, it was more of just self-loathing. The voice inside of my head was just like, you can work as hard as you want, but you're not going to be the best. People are going to be disappointed in the work that you produce. And it's wild because I think that that voice that sounds much like yourself, like it sounds like your voice, is going to take a shape that you're going to recognize, and it's going to be terrifying because the voice that I heard sounded a lot like the voice that I thought was God when I was a kid,
Right.
which that was frightening as well, because I was like, who is this? Like, I thought this was like my protector, and I thought it was like, I don't know if it was God, but I thought it was like maybe like a father figure or something in my head, and it got negative
that ended
quick.
up turning into feeling more like, instead of depression, it was feeling crushed because God was disappointed in you and that kind of thing. Like, did it end up being manifesting like that? Because I know that ends up happening for a lot of people.
No, it actually, instead of looking like that, it actually just reinforced my fear that either God is more like a deist, like he doesn't really give a crap about us individually. He kind of just gave the world a spin and sits back and may intervene when he feels like it. I just felt utterly alone. Like, I felt like God had turned, not that he was disappointed, he just was like, see ya, have fun. And what's wild,
Didn't care.
Yeah, just didn't care. And what's wild is, in hindsight, when I'm looking back on this faith journey, this life journey of mine, I realized that he was there the whole time, but he was letting me fall. Because I got really close to a couple points of, maybe not, I wasn't suicidal, but I got to a couple points where I was just like, I've hit rock bottom. This is the worst. I've never experienced this just lack of, like, I just didn't want to live. And I didn't want to end my life, but I just didn't want to live. Like, I had no motivation to live. And again, it's beautiful in hindsight, because unless that had happened to me, like, I'm pretty sure I would be like a card-carrying, I don't know if I'd be a card-carrying atheist, but I would absolutely just be like living my life, you know? Not a care in the world, just selfish.
It makes total sense. When I hear every story I've ever heard, the best analogy I've ever heard is that God's almost like an obsessed lover who is following you. You're walking away, and he's just a couple steps behind you saying, hey, man, all you got to do is just take that one step to me. Are you going to do it today? No? Okay, but I still love you. All right, so I'm going to follow you. I'm going to keep following you.
God sounds kind of creepy,
keep
Brad.
following you. Yeah, no, it does. It sounds creepy. He does, but it makes perfect sense, because even if you listen to the Old Testament, gets this like horrible rap, and even from me, because I don't understand a lot of it. But the themes that I hear is basically God going,
Right, not giving up.
one step to me. Just take that one step. I'm just begging for that one step. And we're that guy who's basically going, I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah.
I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want anything to do with you. He's like, that's cool. Take that one step. And I swear it's going to be so much better. And we're like, no, you don't like me. You don't like me. And he's like, I'm right here. Just take that step. And that made perfect sense to me, because if you've ever watched like an obsessed, the only thing I can think of is a girl. If you've watched an obsessed girl with a guy, like, they're just like constantly following them around. They're constantly doing this, and this guy is acting like he wants nothing to do with her, and he just keeps walking and keeps walking and keeps walking, and she just keeps coming back, and suddenly she's like in your presence again, and you may ignore her again, and she's like, okay, well, I'm going to come back. I just feel like, but it's not intrusive. I feel like that's the important thing, is it's never intrusive. They're just there.
You know, it's interesting too.
But
like,
it's never intrusive.
Again, I had a point where I don't think I could have been farther. Like, I was lost, and just, I don't know. I didn't have much going for me, or at least I didn't think I did. And I think it was a lot of self-loathing, like a lot of like self-hatred. And part of the reason that I struggled with thinking that God would even give time for me was like, I personally was like, why would anybody waste their time with this? Right. And that's a lot of that narrative that comes with depression, that phenomenon. But it was at this church, it's called Warehouse 242, that I'd been like an off and on kind of member of. And I remember it pretty vividly, but it was during a worship set, and I've played music my whole life, and I've been in a lot of different worship bands and been in regular bands, and I've always connected to the Spirit of God when that happened, and it's rare, but like I'll feel at certain points I'll feel some sort of energy that's like hard to explain even scientifically. Like I'm like, there's some mystery to this. Well, for those of you who know me, or for listeners who don't know me, like I'm not somebody who I'm not a big crier. Like it's hard for me to like tear up unless I'm watching like Bambi get shot, or some other like classic Disney film, which breaks me completely. So I'm standing and everybody's singing around me, and like it's this truly authentic exchange with this spirit or this God that these people believe in, that at this point in my life I'm like, I just don't know if you're there. Like I have this exchange with whoever's listening, which hopefully wasn't somebody behind me worshiping God, like this guy's talking to himself, I don't know what's going on. But I was like, God, I've tried to do this by my own strength, and like for the longest time, like I thought I was strong enough to make this. Like I'm invincible, and like clearly that statement is a lie. I have felt like I'm invincible for years and years and years, and it's because I feel like I do good with whatever that I put my hands to or my time to, but I can't do this. Like I can't do life alone. And I just start, like, I look up the lyrics of the song that was, and I don't remember the exact song, but like I just started bawling my eyes out. Like I'm literally crying in public in front of all of these strangers because I don't go to this church enough. Like I felt like 10 people there, and like I felt this peace, and I felt this like almost warmth around me, and it was like there was this veil that was between like God's spirit or whatever and me, and I felt like that veil just dropped, and he was like, what's up, man? I was here all along, so it's gonna be all right, because God talks to me like I need him to talk to me, which I also think is really cool. But yeah, so that was the breaking point, and then me re-engaging with faith. It's a struggle even to this day, but I've been attempting to stay the course, and I've also come to peace with the fact that like I don't understand God, which I think is maybe the point. So again, I think that this podcast, If Everything Is Okay, is us taking some of these, I don't know, opening some doors maybe that are tough to open, and talking about some stuff that not only we struggle with, that we think maybe y'all are potentially struggling with as well. And yeah, thanks for listening. So James, if people want to stay in touch with us and interact with us, what should they do?
Well, the best way to get in contact with us is probably through our Facebook at facebook.com/everythingisoklahoma. There you can post comments and get in touch with us. It has access to our email and all kinds of things there. And that's the best way to contact us. The best way for us to actually love you and care about you is if you do things for us, because we're humans. So you should go to iTunes and like our podcast. And the best thing is if you leave reviews. That's amazing for us, and a great way to have iTunes do some of our promotion stuff for us.
Yeah, so subscribe, leave a review, and check in with us on Facebook. We also have a website that will have a link actually to that podcast, and that's www.everythingisok.net. And it also links to our Facebook page, so if you're having trouble finding that, you can find it through that. We're also on Twitter. which there's a link there as well. And we'll be updating with various blogs, actually, from different people in our lives, tackling different issues that may actually turn into podcasts in the future. And those will be featured not only on the website, but through Facebook.
This week, we are going to feature a guy named James Price. He is a terrific singer-songwriter out of Oklahoma City. I had the great fortune of playing drums for him in college. He's put out 2 records. One is called The Beacon, which is under James Price Band, and the other is called The Traveler, which is under his name, James Price. You can find him on Spotify, on iTunes. The song you're going to hear today is called Beacon, and I hope you enjoy it. So that'll do it for this episode. I'm Brad Stair.
I'm David Meggs.
And I'm James Eisenhower.
Everything's okay, people.
Savior, come show your favor. Known like I've known before. Now shelter from a better plea, for I know I don't know. I had forgotten where I've been going, and my hope shines alive now, a beacon in which to rest my eyes now. Sunset and the dawn of my weakness begins. Memories of dreams once had. I had forgotten where I've been going, and my hope shines alive now, a beacon in which to rest my eyes, my tired eyes away. Sunrise above on cold feel the unknown. Can you take me now? Change your steps for cloud. Oh, you must have out. I don't know. Had forgotten where I've been going.